This is Amud Yomi Gemara and Shabbos Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis, and we're holding in the bottom of Nun Beis Amud Aleph, 2 lines from the bottom as we quote the end of the Mishnah. The end of the Mishnah dealt with the collar on the Para Aduma, the collar that on an animal which is being sprinkled with the ashes of the Para Aduma. We said in the Mishnah, and you can immerse while the animal is wearing this collar. And as well, you could sprinkle the ashes of the para aduma as well while it is on the animal. Says the Gemara, Lamemra, this seems to teach us the B'nei Kabulei Timaninu. This would sound like this collar around the animal's neck is yes, Mikabel Tama, from the fact that you're purifying it, for the fact you're putting it in the mikvah. But we learned in the Mishnah, Gelim Tabas Adam Tameya, a ring of a person is Tameh. But tabas behema v'kelim v'shargul labois, a ring of a animal or a kelim or any other rings are tahirais. So why are you telling me that the collar of the animal could become tameh? Explains the Gemara and Beizim and Beiz the tabloinam Rav Yitzchak nafcha bebayin minay adam leminay behim. We're talking about a collar that was a person's collar, and then you started using it for an animal. So it was mekabel tuma while the person wore it, and now you're just being metired in the mikvar with the ashes of the para aduma. Teretz number 2, since a person pulls with it the behema, therefore it gets the din of a person utensil, therefore it's mikabel toma. Miloi Tanya explains Rav Yosef Makal Shal Behema Shal Matechas Mikabel Toma. A stick that is used to hit an animal, if it's made out of metal, it's Mikabel Toma. Matam. Since a person utilizes this stick to move and drive the animal, meaning the side of a ring of a human versus an animal is only in a vacuum. But once it's a utensil which is utilized by man to lead the animal, to pull the animal, then that itself will make it a man's item. And therefore, yes, mekabel toma. And the Mishnah said 5 lines down, you could put this collar in the mikvah even when it's on the animal. I asked the Gemara, cases where he hammered it out, he removed and he widened the collar, and therefore there was no chatzitza. Says the Gemara, Lema Ravami Rav Yosef Sirle. This teretz Ravami that you hammered out the collar seemingly is going with Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef was the teretz that said that since you pull the animal with the collar, that's the reason why it's mekabel tama. Why only Rav Yosef? The Rav Yitzchak Nafka, according to Rav Yitzchak Nafka, that it went from a human person, a human adornment, to an animal adornment. Damar bebayin minay adel anay behema, who says that it went from the beauty of a person, to an animal. Kima de rizchan avidu ma'isa. But now when I hammer out the collar and I loosen it up, what happens? That's called an action done to the item. And I'm changing the item, and the halach of Tumah is when I take an item and I change it, it's no longer Mekabel Tumah. So therefore, at that point, when I change the collar, and it used to be, it was a human being collar, now I hammered it to put on my behema, it should no longer be Tameh. Ditinan. As we learned in a Mishnah, first one line is Minayu. Kol hakilim yordei tuma b'machshava. Machshava itself makes something mikabel tuma. But ve'in oilim midei tuma sanela b'shinoi ma'isa. It comes up with an action. So I did an action. This action should make it that is no longer tamei. Answers the Gemara. Ravami can even fit with Rav Yehuda Nafka. How? Savalak Rav Yehuda Damar Maisla Takin La Maisu. When do we say that a Maisa makes something tamei, not tamei? When it's a Maisa to change the item. But a Maisa to fix the item, that's not. The Tanya Rav Yehuda Aimer Loimer Shina Maisa Letakin Ella Lekalkel. Only if it's Lekalkel, only if it's creating a new entity, that's when it will no longer be tamei. But if it's letakein, it's still tamei. Masnita tana, says the Gemara. Another reason how it could be that it will not be a chatzita b'mechulalin, that this collar has holes, thereby allowing the water to go through. Continues the Gemara. Sha'al Talmid Echad, 6 lines from the wide lines. One of the Talmidim, Migalil El Yoin, for the upper Galil, asked Rav Eliezer, I heard that there's some chilik, there's some din of a difference between different types of rings, but I don't know the difference. Said to him, maybe what you're referring to is regarding Shabbos, regarding carrying. Says the Gemara that a tabas with a chaisem, a tabas without a chaisem, that a tabas, a signet ring, you could yes wear, but a non-signet ring you cannot wear. Maybe that's the chilik. Why? Dealing in tama, because if you think there's a chilik in rings with regard to tama, davidachadi, both rings, all rings have the same status with regarding to tama. Says the Gemara, really? Ulini and Tama, Achasi. So they really have the same status with regard to Tama, 2 lines from the wide lines, Vatanan. But we learned in the Mishnah, Tabas Adam Tameima, Tabas Behema Vikilim Sharkul Labas Tahirais. So why are you telling me? Why, Rav Eliezer, are you responding, Gloisai Talmud, that with regarding to Tama, all rings have the same status? No, they do not. Answers the Gemara, Kik Amar Lei Inhu Ihu Nami Danu Kamar. Rav Eliezer was talking about that there's no distinction when it's all human rings. Says Mar, really? Uda Adam Davda Achasi? But I'll ask you, within rings of a person is Chalukim in Tama. V'atani, we learned in a Braisa, Tabas Shehitkina, the second white line. Lechgar by Masna V'likasha by Menktiz of Taira, a ring that was used to hold up one's pants or to tie the sleeves but between one's shoulders is tar. It's not Mikabel Tama. Why? Because it is a ring that is made to function a garment, and therefore it's not Mikabel Tama. The only type of ring that's Mikabel Tama is if you wear it. So it says the Gemara, within human rings, there's rings that we wear, and there's functional rings, rings used to hold our clothing together. That which used to hold their clothing together is not Mikabel Tama, has a din of a keli, has a din of begadim. Answers Gemara, that's what Karmeli, whenever Lezer said all rings are the same, he meant wearing rings. Really, says the Gemara? This is the third level kasha. If you're following, first it was Adam Behema, then it was Adam Adam. Now it's Etzba Etzba. Uda Etzba Adam Achaziva. Tani learned in the Mishnah. Tabash al Mateches. If the ring is a metal and the signet is of almoig, a type of wood, then it's tamei. He shall almoig. But if the ring is wooden, then it's tar. So we see within the rings, there's different ones which are Mikabel Tama. He was talking about all metal rings. Va'id Charles, that was number one. The Talmud asked, Rav Eliezer answered. Va'id Charles, the Talmud asked another kasha. I heard there are differences in needles. Amar Lei, Rav Eliezer said, Shabbos, maybe we're talking about Shabbos carrying out the needles. Dilin Yitoma, as we learned back in the second parak. Dilin Yitoma, David Achasi. Says what really? We learned in the Mishnah in Kalim, a needle that the whole of it, the eye has been removed or the point is removed, it's tar. It's no longer a functioning needle. So we see even within needles there's chalukim. Kikamarle b'shleima. Others said all complete needles. Ub'shleima davda achasi asked the Gemara. V'atanan, 4 lines from the Mishnah, machash alisa chaluda. A needle that's rusty, if you no longer could sew with it, it's tar, because it's no longer functionable. So we see this chalukim within needles. Answers parenthetically, but it has to be that it's a rishum. Its impression is nicker. It has to be that the shape is some level discernible even beneath the rust. But we see that within needles, within complete needles, there are chalukim. Ki karmelei b'shiva karmelei with polished needles. U'b'shiva davda achasi with polished complete needles. Are they really all the same? V'atanya macha b'nikuva b'nikuva needle whether it has a hole or not. Motel taltel b'shabbos. I mean a nikuva linin toma bilvad. So we see that only with regard to toma the difference if it has a hole. So says the Gemara, you see clearly there's chalukim within needles. Says Rabbiya, the Bryce is talking according to Rava, unfinished needles. But of course, once it's finished, then of course there will be no chalik. That's how Rav Eliezer answered the Talmud. That's when there's no chalukim in needles, when it's complete, when it's smooth, when it was finished, it had the hole. The fact if it's either not whole, the fact it's either tarnished, the fact if it either never had a hole in it, that would make a difference with regard to Tomo. That's not what Rav Eliezer meant when he answered the Talmud. That's all the same. We'll pick it up from the Mishnah. B'siyata d'Ishmael.